Okay, so I'm really glad that you're here, and I'm super glad that you're interested enough in Guardian Angel to really be able to dig into this, because with a small group like this, this is only for recording. So I'm sure you can hear me, but for a small group, it's really fun because there's some actual hardcore exercises to do about making this all work. Now, I saw that, and when she does this kind of thing, that means you need to have your own copy, right? And we do have a couple of extra. This is really cool because I'm sure that the women in this room, by the time we're done, will all say, "Yeah, I already knew that. Isn't it great that that's what the Bible actually says?" Okay, and the men will say, "Oh no, I didn't know the Bible actually said that." So the way that it works is a woman gets into the book and she realizes, my gosh, this is stuff that I've already known. It's intuitive to me. It's how I feel about things. And then she tries to convince her husband that this is the way it really works. And of course, he's resistant because it challenges the way that the culture has explained the role of husband, the prophet, priest, and king idea, right? And I suggest a strategy. And since all the men are here, you're going to know the strategy when it happens, but that's okay, it'll work anyway. Okay? I suggest the following strategy, that you start reading the book, and you'll come across something that really speaks to you. And you'll go to your husband and you say, "Boy, I'm really having a hard time understanding this. Would you help me understand this?" And then he's going to have to sit down and read it with you and explain it to you. And when he does, of course, he'll be explaining the very thing that you already know he needs to know. And that way he'll feel like it was his idea, right? You remember my big fat Greek wedding? That's how it works, right? Women know what we're supposed to do, and then they have to convince us that it was our idea to begin with so that we will adopt it, okay? Works every time. All right, and that means you'll need an extra copy of the book as well, right? Because you'll underline different things that'll speak to you, so that's the way it's going to work. Now what we'll do is we'll walk through part of the discussion of this book, because you have the academic version. We actually did an abridged version for 7,000 girls in El Salvador, because I believe that the change of the culture happens with women, not with men. And if I want to change the way a culture thinks, I need to empower women to do that. And so we were in El Salvador, and a friend of mine is a vice principal at a big conglomerate of Christian schools all over the country. And we were working on this because in that environment, it's a macho culture and women don't have much status, but they experience all the abuse of the culture. So he and I got together and we translated the book into Spanish, and of course it was for high school girls, so we had to cut all the academic stuff out because they don't care about that. It had to be less than 200 pages so they would actually read it. And then we did the conferences with the girls only, 800, 900 girls at a time. And all the boys were excluded from the conferences at the school. We did this in the high schools, right? And of course all the boys are, they're like so anxious to find out what's happening because it's all their girlfriends in there and they want to know so they can keep control of things, what the girls are being taught. And we taught them phrases like, "Yo tengo el poder," I have the power, right? And we would instruct them when they go out, okay, now I want you to go out, find your boyfriend and say, "Yo tengo el poder," because he's no longer in charge of what happens to you. And we convinced these girls that the only way they could actually change the culture was to band together. Do you know the Greek play by Thucydides called Lysistrata, right? You know that play? Oh, okay, yes. And the really great part about that play is it's the women who change the culture, right? The women all the men want to go off to war. They can't wait to, get out there and slash some swords around, get some booty and destroy stuff, just like we do, right? Except we do it in the business world, we're more ethical about it, but same idea. Okay, and the women say, "No, you can't do that, because if you go away, some of you won't come back. Some of you will come back injured. All of us will be without our men to protect and nourish us while you're gone. We don't want you to go." What do the men say? Forget it. You're just women. We should be able, we'll make up our own minds about this. So all the women in the village get together and they make a pact. And they basically say, "Great, go off to war if you want. But if you do, we'll never have sex with you again." And the men all get together that night and they say, "Maybe we don't need to go to war." And now, Lysistrata wrote this play in the 5th century BC as a kind of comical look at what was happening in the culture of Athens, right? So I thought, this is a great idea. We can use this in El Salvador. And we got these girls to all agree that if any one of the girls was ever injured, abused, taken advantage of by any of the men in her environment, father, brother, uncle, boyfriend, all of the rest of the girls would refuse to have relationships with their boyfriends. And I will tell you what happens. All of the boyfriends show up at the abuser's house and say, what are you doing? You have really messed my life up. Straighten it out, right? So, Yo Tengo El Poder worked really well down in El Salvador, and we distributed this book to 7,000 girls. So you're now getting the unabridged version, and we're going to try to show you how the biblical context from the Hebrew scriptures actually supports this empowering of women in a way that probably we haven't understood in the West, since the church has taught something very different about the role of women since, about the middle of the 15th century. Okay? So we'll start off by looking really deeply into the Genesis account, because that's where it all comes from. And if we have enough time and the clock doesn't run out, we'll get to the point where we can start talking about how come the New Testament seems to say something different. How come we read the New Testament differently than we would if we were Hebrew rabbis like Paul? Right? And so we'll try to straighten out some of that. And then late this evening, we'll have a chance to actually practice some of this in interaction between the two of you. And at that point, you have to have your own pen and pencil, because you're not allowed to look at his answers while you're writing down yours, okay? All right, so we'll have some fun. And by the way, if you stop having fun, just tell me and then we'll try something else, because the whole idea is that we need to have fun doing this, okay? Guardian angel, the concept of the Hebrew idea of the role and the responsibility of women. And just in case you're feeling like you're left out because you're not a woman, understand that if you understand her role, it's going to be very good for you, okay? The whole idea is that men get blessed when they understand how women are supposed to be working in the relationship, okay? So let's try it. We got to start with the beginning. And the beginning is Genesis 1:26 and 27. So what does Genesis 1:26 and 27 say? You can tell me. What? Okay, somebody know Genesis 1:26 and 27. No, don't go to your phones and look it up, right? Man, yeah, and God said, let us make man in our image and according to our likeness, and let him rule over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air. You know the verse now, right? Okay? The important part is this. And God said, let us make man in our own image and according to our likeness. And there are two Hebrew words there. When God wants to say something important and he uses two different words, that means he's not repeating himself. It means that the two words actually mean something different. And we need to understand the differences between that. So if we say image and likeness, we have the tendency to think, oh yeah, that's a Xerox copy. But in Hebrew, image and likeness talk about two different ideas that need to be combined for us to understand what it is that God's doing when he makes someone, right? Okay, demut and salem. One of them talks about, in the Greek word, the Greek translation for it is icon. So you right away, you know it's a representation of, like an icon photocopy of a dollar bill, right? Would you rather have a dollar bill or an icon photocopy of a dollar bill? Okay, well, let's make it easier. A $500 bill. Which one would you rather have, the photocopy or the real thing? Really? Okay, so obviously, icon can't mean a photocopy of. God's not making a photocopy of himself. He's making an image that acts just like he does, that has responsibilities like he does, that functions like he does. So you could spend your 500 as easily as God could spend his 500, right? So it's not just a representation. It's not just, you're not just a photocopy of some spiritual image. You actually have a functional role that processes things the way God does, right? That's icon, right? The other one, of course, is likeness. And for that, we need to have the following modifications. Because an icon can be an icon of anything. I can make an icon, an image, an actual functioning image of anything if I draw up a contract, right? If I have a contract that says power of attorney, you can act just like me. You have the authority to do what I would do because you have power of attorney, right? But I want you to have, in likeness, a limited power of attorney so that there are specific things that you can do that will be in my image and some things that you are not allowed to do because they're not in my image, okay? So I need both image and likeness because it's not sufficient for you to just say, well, you know, I'm spiritual, I have a spirit, therefore I'm like God. Wrong. In order to be like God, I also have to have the limited power of attorney that God grants me to do the things that he does. Because I can do lots of things that aren't in his purposes. And I could claim, yeah, but you see, I'm acting like God acts because I'm creating, I'm deciding, all that kind of stuff. But until I do it according to his plan, it wouldn't be in his likeness. So I need both of those together to make up the image of God. Okay. Now we do a little history lesson. But look, I need to, this thing is going to bother me all night long. Because now it's saying I have 63 minutes and 36 seconds to get through this, okay? So, and you understand, of course, that I don't function that way. So what's going to happen is that this is preventing me from doing all these really interesting rabbit trails that really turn out to be kind of cool, right? So if you feel like we're going too fast or there's something you don't understand, please stop us. Because I'm not here to try to just race through the material. You can go home and read the book, right? I'm here to help you understand the concept, and that means you need to track with me. So if I'm going too fast, just stop me and just say, hey, wait a minute, I didn't get that. Let's back up. That's okay. And then I'll deal with the blue clock later, okay? Okay.
The blue clock is just there so we get to eat dinner.
Okay. I'll think about that. Okay. Yes, dear. Yes, Salem and Demut. You'll find it right in the very first chapters. Okay? And by the way, as we go along, I'm probably going to, need visual aids. That means you're going to get called on to do stuff. So we'll get to know each other a lot better that way. Okay? So Salem and Demut. Now, what's really important about this is that we now do a little bit of Western theology. Does anybody know who Thomas Aquinas was? Yeah. Awesome. Did you know that Thomas Aquinas is probably the most important Christian theologian who ever lived? Because he set the stage for the way that all Christian theology thinks, both Protestant and Catholic, right? How would I define Descartes? Okay, Descartes is a rationalist who gave us a very interesting argument for the existence of ourselves, and doubted even the emotional experiences of human beings and animals. So Descartes is really important for mathematics and for philosophy and for the Western idea of the self. But it's Thomas Aquinas who set the stage for how we understand God. Let's just back up. Ask yourself about the Summa Theologica and what he did in that. And what I'll suggest to you is that he established what we now call the attributes of God. And just about every theological textbook has a chapter called the attributes of God, right? Yes, he's reluctantly bowing his head and I better rethink all this from my past education. Right, cool. So Thomas Aquinas is really, really fundamental in how we understand who God is, because he goes through the attributes of God and he gives us what we call in theology the via negativa. And what he says is, don't you realize that God is, you can name them, omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent, eternal, perfect, holy. He has a few categories in there that we don't understand today in our language, like simple, okay? What he means is he's not composed of parts, okay? And then he has immutable, right? You know what that means, he never changes. Impassible, have you ever heard about that one? It's a logical extension of immutability, because pascho, the Greek idea for emotion, is something that fluctuates. Today, she's the best thing that ever happened to you. Tomorrow, you cannot understand why in the world you made that choice, right? Okay? So your emotions go up and down, and all the Greeks recognized that. And they said, wait a minute, have you ever heard somebody say you need balance in your life? That's a Greek idea, because the Greeks feared all emotion. They were afraid to feel love, and they were afraid to feel hate. Why? Because in the Greek world, the ideal state is balance. Everything in exact proportion so that nothing upsets the apple cart. Okay? So from Aquinas' perspective, immutability, which means that God cannot change, entails impassibility, which means that God cannot feel. Now, I'm not telling you that, you pray to God and you want him to feel how you feel, and you believe God is filled with emotion and all this kind of stuff, but I'm telling you that theologically, the logic of it says that's not possible. In fact, when they came up with this logical extension of immutability, I can show you the documents where the theologians say, we better not tell the preachers about this because it'll have a dramatic effect on the audience. So we'll just skate over this one. But logically, if God cannot logically change, then obviously he can't have emotions, because emotions are fluctuations. Okay? So now we've got the attributes of God, just some of them, the most important ones, by the way. And now I want you to reread the Genesis text with the idea of the image of God. So let's read the Genesis text again. And God said, let us make man in our own image. Okay? What's the image in Christian theology? Immutable, impassible, eternal, perfect, holy, omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent. Okay? So, of course, that's the way God made you, right? You know that she is immutable, impassible, omniscient, omnipotent, holy, perfect, eternal, right? No, the whole point is, from a theological perspective, none of the things that God is are us. That's why it's called the via negativa. In other words, Aquinas said, if we look at the way man is constructed, nothing about man is true of God. Man is finite. Man is not perfect. He is temporal. He's not omnipresent. He's not omniscient, right? All that kind of stuff. Yes?
You're describing man after the fall.
Hold on. We'll get there. We can't start in Genesis 3. We got to start in Genesis 1. So hold on. We'll get there. Okay? So my point is, if the verse says, let us make man in our own image, obviously God did not intend to make other little gods. He intended to make an image that represented him that wasn't confined by the attributes that Aquinas discovered. Okay? That means that I need to back up and ask myself, in a Hebrew context, what does image of God mean? Because after all, this is a Hebrew context, right? It's not Greek philosophy we're doing. It's a Hebrew context. It's a Hebrew verse, right? So I want to know, what does the image of God mean in Hebrew? There's a huge difference between the Hebrew language and the Greek language, and it can be fundamentally boiled down to this. The Greek language is a noun-based language. It sees the world in terms of boxes that are connected by verbs, okay? So it's a person, place, and thing language. And by the way, that's how we function in an Indo-European language. We pay attention to the nouns, right? The subject is important. The direct object is important. The verb is the connecting tissue, okay? But Hebrew doesn't work like that. Hebrew is a verb-based language. So in Hebrew, the most important thing is the action. In fact, it's much more like a Native American language, Navajo, where in Navajo, I would say, there's a running on the hill, not a man running down the hill. Because subject doesn't matter as much as the action that's involved, okay? Now I want you to go back and think about the Genesis 1, 26 and 27 passage as a verb, not a noun, right? In other words, how does God create a verb? Well, come with me to Parma. We'll go to the Duomo. We'll lay on the floor. We'll look up at the Caravaggio cupola, and I can point out a picture of God up there. Is that a noun or a verb? The picture of God on the ceiling. It's a noun because it's a person, place, or thing on the ceiling. Okay? I defy you to paint a verb. Do you understand what's happening? A verb only exists in the action. As soon as the action's over, the verb doesn't exist anymore because it's only the action. Okay, so now we're going to go back and look at this really important sentence because this is the fundamental to everything, because he's not just creating men like this, he's creating them male and female. So the fundamental ontological equality of male and female is built around the image of God. And what is the image of God? Well, it doesn't take me very long to figure that out. I just go to Exodus 3:14 where Moses says, hey, what's going on and who is this? And how does God reply? Do you know how he replies in Hebrew? He replies with a form of the verb to be. In other words, he doesn't say, I am that I am. He gives Moses a syntactical expression of the verb to be. And we stumble over trying to translate this thing. Sometimes I will be what I will be, I am what I am, all that, because we don't know how to deal with it. Because why? Because it's a raw verb, right? In other words, what God says is if you really want to know my image, you will know it in the action, right? It's not the gray bearded guy on the Sistine Chapel holding out his finger. That's not God, nor is it a representation of God. And why do the Jews say you shouldn't represent God? Because God is a verb. If you want to represent God, you need to see him in action. By the way, that's exactly what Jesus says, right? If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. Does that mean you saw the flesh and blood view of God? No, you've seen how Jesus acts, and that is the Father, okay? So, that means when God says, let us make man in our own image, he's thinking about a verb. He's making verbs in the world. In other words, he's making actions that will represent him. How do you do that? Tell me one thing let's start with the via negativa. I'll ask your wife because I know what your answer would be. Okay? Okay. Mariani. Okay? Mariani. Is this guy sitting next to you omnipotent? Oh, did I choose the wrong one? Because he probably thinks he is. Probably. Yes. Omnipotent, right? Okay, let me back up a little. Let me back up a little bit. Let's try one more. How about omniscient? He knows everything. Hasn't he told you that many times?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Okay. So you see, here's the problem. Of course, you know that isn't the case, right? And from your perspective, I'll bet you think she's omniscient because she always knows what you're doing. That's right. That's really, boy, I tell you. I was going to assign one of my books today to one of the guys at the table, and the inscription went, to the least arrogant man I've ever known. Anyway, the point is, you can see that the idea of image in terms of the attributes that Thomas Aquinas developed doesn't fit at all. Okay? So I need to know what are the attributes of God that actually fit the verbal idea of God. Okay? So let me ask you this. Is God an order maker? No? You don't think so? You don't think the first chapter of Genesis is all about ordering things? It is, right? Because what does it say? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And the earth, which was without form, it was chaos, it was just a mess. And what did God do? The Spirit of God hovers over the face of the dark, and order comes out of the chaos. So God is an order maker. Do you think it's possible for him to make order? Can he bring order to life? Yeah. I'm not asking you if he does. I'm asking you if he can. Okay?
Well, at least he's tried.
Yes, that's right. At least he tried. The whole point is, as he brings order to life, he acts like God would act. And he's in God's image. Okay? Let me give you another one. This is for you. Do you think God is compassionate? The word in Hebrew is rachum. It comes from Exodus 34, 6 and 7. And God says, as he passes by Moses, the Lord, and the first word he uses is rachum, which means compassionate. Right? God defines himself as compassion. By the way, that word, if I change one of the vowels, also means the womb. So the first thing God says to Moses about who he is I'm a pregnant woman. Check that one out. What he says is, if you want to understand compassion, You have to understand what it's like for a woman to carry an unborn child. That's compassion. Total dependence and utter obligation, okay? So, if I ask you, can you be compassionate? You would say, sure, I can be compassionate. You're compassionate towards your children, I'm sure, right? And insofar as you're compassionate, you model God. It's a verb. It's the way you act. Can you be forgiving? Can you be merciful? Can you control your temper? Arik apayim is the word in Hebrew. God says, I have literally a long nose. And what he means is, I don't get angry quickly. I take a long breath. How long is God's breath? 1,000 years. 1,000 years he breathes in before he acts, right? So for me to not get quickly angry is to be in God's image. And when I start looking at all the verb things that God is, I discover something really amazing. I can't be a man according to systematic theology because I am exactly the opposite of God. You know, he's eternal, I'm temporal. He's perfect, I'm not perfect. He's holy, I'm not holy. But in terms of the Hebrew definition, I can be like God because I can be compassionate. I can bring order to life. I can be forgiving. I can show mercy. All those things that are listed in Genesis 34, 6 and 7, where God defines himself, I can be those. So God says, I'm going to make you like the verb that I am. And insofar as you demonstrate those actions, you will be in my image. Implication. You can do things as a Homo sapien that are not in God's image. Can't you? Right? The world's filled with people who are Homo sapiens, but they're not in God's image. Why? Because they don't act like him. Right? If I bring disorder to the world, if I bring chaos, if I'm not forgiving, if I don't show mercy, if I'm filled with hate, those things are opposed to God's image. So right at the beginning of the whole process, God says, if you want to be human, you will act like me. And if you don't act like me, here's the punchline, you aren't human. And in fact, Jude in his letter even says that. He talks about people who are animal-like because they're not acting like God. Well, I'll tell you, that explains a whole lot about what's going on in the world. See, our confusion is that we equivocate between human being and Homo sapien, because there are a lot of Homo sapiens in the world who aren't humans. Right? Isn't that true? I mean, you know some of them. And in fact, there have been days when you wondered about him. Right? Okay? Because to be human is to act like God. Okay? Let me tell you one of the other things that God does. He keeps his promises. He is a covenant God. He's a promise-keeping God. Okay? So if you want to be like God, you keep your promises. Amazing, huh? Imagine if people in the business world were human. They would keep their promises. Wouldn't that be amazing? Wouldn't that be a shock if there were actually human beings in the business world instead of Homo sapiens? Okay? Or in the political world. I mean, we're coming up to an election. How many of those people are actually animals? I mean, think about it. In terms of God's image, I want to look for someone who is like God, who does the things that God would do. Right? Okay, why is this so important? Why have we spent, now we're down to 46 minutes. Why have we spent so much time on this? Because this is the fundamental ontology of existence that God created, and it's absolutely just as true for you as it is for you. There's no difference between female and male when it comes to this stuff. So if you want to see God's image in your wife, you look for compassion, forgiveness, mercy, long-suffering, what? Right. And if she doesn't see it in you, she has every right to say, by the way, I didn't marry an animal. Shape up, right? Okay? Because the whole idea is that if this is going to work at all, if we're going to talk about any relationships that work between human beings, we have to start with the ontological equality. And the ontological equality is based on image of God. It's as simple as that, right? If we're going to, look, everything in the relationship begins here. Because if you for any moment think that somehow you are not the same as your wife in terms of image of God, or you're not the same as your husband in terms of image of God, you are already off the playing field. Right? This is where it starts. It starts with absolute equality. Now we'll get to the fall because things change, right? But God didn't start it that way. He started it with absolute equality. And by the way, if we are going to return to a kingdom view of God's intention for the world, we will have to return to absolute equality because that's what it's all about. What does the letter say? No difference between free and slave, rich and poor. What's the other one? Male and female. In other words, he's saying, listen, get back to the original intention. The original intention was equality. Right? Okay. Let's try the next verse. Genesis 2:18. Questions? Anybody have any questions? Somebody object?
I'm struggling with the verb thing, but let's keep going.
Okay. Cool. That's okay. Just imagine trying to paint a verb on the ceiling. Yeah. Okay. All right. And by the way, you're right. You can struggle with it because it's so different than the way we think about language. But Semitic languages work very differently than we do. Their grammar, their syntax, everything is very different. And if you're really, really, really interested, I'll send you to Benjamin Lee Whorf, Language, Thought, and Reality, and you can see how this works out in other contemporary languages, like Chinese, Japanese, those kind of pictographic kinds of languages. It's a fascinating study. Okay? So you remind me afterwards, and I'll give you the reference, okay? Yeah, because... Yeah, isn't this so cool? Because God doesn't finish. What he does is he says, I'm going to put a whole bunch of verbs to work, and you guys go finish the job, right? By being like me in the world. Yes?
So if I understand that, is that the Lord comes back, and we all get to heaven.
Okay, wait. You're 3,000 years down the road.
Doesn't matter.
Okay.
His intention at the very beginning
Yeah.
is going to be accomplished once we all get to heaven.
Isn't that absolutely perfectly cool? And Jeremiah actually even says that. We'll get to the passage in Jeremiah where he's describing the millennial kingdom, and he says something that we should have learned in Genesis chapter 1. Okay? We'll get to that. Yeah. Okay? But this is so fundamental because, listen, it is the natural tendency of Homo sapiens to create hierarchy. It's the natural tendency. I'm more important than you. You're less important than me. My idea is more important than yours, right? It's the natural tendency. It's what happens in Genesis chapter 3, and we'll see why. But it wasn't the way God designed it. That's the point. The whole idea of guardian angel is to understand the design plan so that we know what we're working toward, right? Look, we all know we're working in a mess. That's easy. There isn't a marriage here that doesn't have a mess, okay? If there is, my gosh, angelic beings will rise from the table. We know what the mess is. What we don't know is how to fix it, okay? So, and we can't fix it if we don't know what the original plan was. Yes? That's what Adam says. After he screws up royally, what does he say? Look, God, it wasn't my fault. First, you gave me this woman, and I just did what she told me. And second, you designed her wrong. Right? We'll see. It's a good free will excuse, isn't it? Don't try it with her. Okay? We're going to have to talk about all that. But wait till we get to Genesis chapter 3. You guys you're so anxious to get to the bad stuff. Okay? You must have been, saturated with too much TV because you just want to get to the bad guys. Okay, let's talk about the good guys, right? So the good guys are, right now in Genesis chapter 1, we see equality. Equality everywhere. Because what also God does is he's an order maker. And so he puts Adam and Eve in the garden to create order and to bring that order outside the garden, right? What does he say? Be fruitful, multiply, subdue the earth, right? But he puts them in the garden. Is there anything to subdue in the garden? No, the garden works perfectly. So obviously he doesn't intend them to stay there. He intends them to take his verbal representations to the rest of the world, to finish the job, to make the whole world into a garden, right? Okay? And by the way, the audience understands that. You know, the word for subdue there in Hebrew means with strenuous effort. Now, I don't see Adam in the garden with strenuous effort trying to get things done. Everything in the garden works perfectly. So obviously, God intended Adam to, with strenuous effort, bring about order in the rest of the world, which, by the way, he assigned to both of you. You don't get to go to work and she sits home waiting for you to bring home the paycheck. Sorry, it's with strenuous effort to fulfill the commandment to make the world into a garden. Right? Okay. Getting that's a little rabbit trail, but it's allowed. I only took 25 seconds. Okay, so let's go back to the Genesis 2:18, because this is really an important passage, okay? What does Genesis 2:18 say? You're going to look in my book to find it? Okay. Does no one have a Bible here?
I'm making for you a helper.
That's right. Okay, good. I'm glad you put the Hebrew in there, because helper isn't the right word. Go ahead. What does it say? 2:18.
God had the Jewish version. Adonai God said, it isn't good that person should be alone. I will make for him a companion suitable to help.
Okay, stop. This is great, because now think about this. At the end of Genesis chapter 1, how does God evaluate the creation? Very good, right? That's the end of chapter 1. 18 verses later, he says, it isn't good. What happened? God changed his mind, right? Oh, no, what happened is, it's not about being good or bad. The word there isn't about being good or bad. You know what it's about? What he's saying is, listen, it's not good because there's something missing. It's not that there's bad in the creation. It's that some piece of it isn't completed. Okay? So he says, it's not good. There's some incompleteness here that man should be, and this is the important one, alone. It doesn't mean that he's by himself. Right? There's two ways for me to understand alone. One is to be by myself. The other is to be disconnected from myself. Okay? And what he says is, without the Ezer Kenegdo, a man is disconnected from himself. Why? Well, let's think about where Adam is and what's happening. Okay? First, what's Adam's relationship to the world? Good or bad? Very good, right? The whole world is working the way it's supposed to, and he's enjoying the benefit of it all. What about Adam's relationship to the animals? Very good. In fact, God parades all the domesticated animals in front of him so that he can name them and take authority over them, and they can all function the way that they're supposed to enhance the whole project, okay? What about Adam's relationship with God? Good or bad? Good, very good. No sin in the world, right? So, Adam has a perfect relationship with the world, a perfect relationship with the animals, a perfect relationship with God. What's he missing? What?
Relationship with himself.
Absolutely. And can he have a relationship with himself without another person? And the answer is no. Because here's what Adam does. He gets up in the morning, he's in the garden, right? Goes and looks in the mirror, he says, what shall we do today? I think we should go fishing. The image in the mirror says, no, you can't go fishing. Today you're supposed to be working with the lilies. He says, wait a minute, who are you to tell me what I should do? The amazing thing about the guy in the mirror is he always agrees with me. Right? I've never to this day stood in front of a mirror and had the guy on the other side tell me I can't do something. He always tells me it's okay to do whatever I want to do, which means that I never have experienced conflict with myself until I have someone else who challenges me, right? And that's the problem with Adam. He can't become who he is until he learns voluntary submission to another. Did you get that? I can't become me until I learn to voluntarily submit to another. Right? There's a reason why God doesn't compel you to follow him. I mean, look, God could say, get saved or I'm going to send a lightning bolt down and strike you. But he never does that. Why? because he wants you to voluntarily submit, which is an act of identity. And here it is, right in the Genesis chapter 2 story. The reason it's not good for Adam to be alone, that is, disconnected, is because he can't find himself unless he knows how to voluntarily submit to someone else. So he needs the other person in order to become who he is. Right? Adam is made by God. But without another person, he can't become the full human being he was supposed to be. So God says, I'm going to solve this problem by making him an Ezer Kenegdo. We're going to go back to Ezer Kenegdo because the idea is really, really important. But I want you to see why God says that. He says it because without that operation, without that function, without that difference, the man cannot be himself. He will just be an image that always agrees with whatever. And that's not what it means to be human. In God's world, my ability to be myself means that I have to identify myself in relation to another. All Hebrew worldviews are built on relation. And I have to have that relation with another in order to know who I am. Okay? So God's going to do something about that. In the meantime, after he does that, we get to Genesis 2:23. What does Genesis 2:23 say?
Then the man said, this at last is called my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, because
Right, good. What translation? ESV, okay. This is the verse after God puts Adam into a deep trance, removes a piece of him, not a rib. The word is for the side of a hill. Okay? He removes a piece of him and constructs the woman and brings the woman to the man, and he wakes up and he says, at last, this is bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman because she came from man. Now, in English, you don't see what's happening. But in Hebrew, it's really, really interesting. Because the word for woman is isha. And the word for man is ish. So it looks as though isha is a derivative of the word ish. She should be called isha because she comes from ish. But in fact, the two words come from different roots. So Adam is not doing anything about etymological differences in the words. He's actually creating a word play on the phonetics of the word to teach you something else. And what he teaches you is what's not in the verse. I mean, Hebrew's so awesome. It's like this fabulous puzzle where you get to put all these pieces together, right? Okay, so what's not in that verse? Well, I'll tell you what's not in the verse because otherwise you'd have to go back and read all the rest of the verses in Hebrew to see it, okay? What's not in the verse is the word for man, Adam, right? In other words, all along this story, up to this verse, every time we've referred to the word man, it's been Adam, right? God creates Adam, mankind. God creates male and female, Adam, all the way through Adam, until we get to this verse. And in this verse, the word Adam, man, is changed to ish, okay? Here comes the punchline, ladies. Remember this. The man is the one who changes the noun from Adam to ish. Why? Because in the presence of the woman, he alters his identity. Did you get that? She is so important and vital to who he is that he changes his ontological status as Adam to reflect a word, ish, which is about relationships, not about independence. In other words, what he says is, discovering her has made me who I am. I will take on a different word for me because of her. I mean, think about how powerful that is. That's awesome. What it says is, man, you didn't even know who you are without her, right? Because of her, you changed everything in your life. She was the reason you became who you are, right? That's the way God designed it. Remember, we're talking about the fall. We're talking about the design plan, okay? Now, with that verse in mind, everybody knows this verse. Genesis 2:24. What does it say? Don't forget the first word. Thank you. Therefore. Right. Everybody knows that verse because it's used in all kinds of weddings, right? But look what it says. As a result of the man changing his identity because of the presence of the woman, Isha, as a result of that, therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother, and the word there is for to cut off. It's the same word for leaving idolatry. It's a very strong word. A man shall, with strength, leave the family connection that he had with his parents, and the next word is davak, which means to glue together. And he will super glue himself to his Ezer Kenegdo. Okay? So we're going to do that right now. I need you. It's okay. I don't bite yet. We haven't introduced the serpent yet. Okay? So here's the way. Now I want you to understand what the verse says, and we're going to play it out so that you can see it. You stand here up at the front of the cathedral where you're going to get married, and you come with me. Because the verse says, a man shall leave his father and mother. So, yes, son, I'm now going to give you to the bride. Okay? A man shall leave his father and mother. I'm saying goodbye to you. Our relationship has been cut off, temporarily removed, so that you can be glued to her, right? Okay? That's how you all got married, right? The husband walked down the aisle. The bride was waiting in the front.
Nobody stands for the groom.
What?
Nobody stands for the groom.
You didn't get married that way, but there's the verse. The verse says, a husband shall leave his parents and be given to the wife so that he can be glued to her. He's changed his identity because of her. He takes on her name. Oh, you didn't get that? What happened? I'll tell you what happened. You got married according to a patriarchal pagan ceremony where the wife is considered a product, a piece of, property. And, I'm sorry? Yeah, a piece of property that the family negotiated a price for. This is where the ritual comes from. It's a pagan ritual. But it's been incorporated into the church over centuries and centuries in spite of the biblical text, which says just the opposite. By the way, what does the biblical text say is the duty of the wife in the marriage? Read from that sentence. Well, wait. Read it from the sentence. What does it say in the sentence? Nothing. That's exactly right. It says nothing. In other words, all she has to do is wait for him to get glued.
Receiving is implied, right? Receiving.
Yeah, she takes on being glued to him. Okay? That's all. It's all about him. He comes down. He separates himself from his parental obligations as a family member, right? He removes that obligation and he gives that obligation to her. And, as I said, devak is the verb. And the devak means to superglue. By the way, devak has nothing to do with how you feel. Okay? All this thing, I'm so in love with him. I have to have him. We have all kinds of interesting English expressions for that. Like when we find out in the workplace that some guy is now, going out with this girl and he's going to marry her, what do we say? Oh man, that guy is head over heels. In other words, he's out of control. Or he's fallen in love. How many of you have control as you're falling? Right? Nobody, right? The whole idea is he's now absolutely worthless to the business world because his feelings have spun his control mechanisms out of place. Okay? So our version of love and marriage is that you have to be out of control. Okay? And every man knows that. You're out of control to get married in the first place. So now you're really in trouble. Okay? So here's the Hebrew idea. The Hebrew idea is the man is totally in control because he literally has to give himself in obligation to the woman. Right? She waits for him to glue himself. He removes the original family obligation and he attaches it to the wife. Why? Because his identity has been changed by her. He's completely and revolutionary changed his mind about who he is because of her. Right? We haven't gotten to the fall. This is the design plan. Look how cool that is. God set it up so that we as men can only discover who we are in the presence of the woman. And when we do that, we are completely altered in the way that we think about the world because of her. Okay? Now, here's the best part. It says, therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. Okay? And of course all men are thinking, wow, I can't wait for the one flesh part. Wrong. Because the Hebrew word is basar, and it means this stuff, flesh, but it also has another meaning. Basar is also the word for proclamation. So what it says is this. God starts off with Adam, and out of Adam he creates two beings who mutually have to interact for each one to have the identity God intends. And the process of marriage is to reunite them so that they will become echad basar, one proclamation. Right? The ultimate purpose of this union is one proclamation. In other words, the reason that you are together is so that you will proclaim the unity of God in the two of you. It's awesome stuff. Awesome stuff in this little story. Yeah, cool, huh? Yeah, that's a verb. That's right. That's a verb. You are to become one verb out of two mutually submissive people. You can't know who you are until you voluntarily submit. And when you do, you speak as God speaks, one verb in the world. It's awesome stuff. Okay? Now, of course, something happens.
Before you go to the fall, I have a little question on that.
Okay?
Therefore, the woman completes the man.
Therefore, what?
The woman completes the man.
Yeah, in fact, the rabbis say a man without a wife diminishes the world.
What completes a woman?
Oh, thank you so much for asking. You're not going to like the answer, though. Okay? Here's the story. Oh, we haven't gone to the Ezer Kenegdo part, but if you hang on to that, I'll show you what happens in that, okay? No, of course not. We're talking about equality. We're talking about a God-level covenant commitment, right? Okay? And you'll see the text is all about that, okay? So let's take a look. Critical vocabulary. We talked about that. Why does Adam need help? Oh, this is a really interesting thing. Why does God say Adam needs help, other than to discover himself? Because he's given the commandment, right? Adam's given the commandment. Before all the story happens, Adam's given the commandment. What's the commandment? What's the commandment for Adam? No, that's Star Wars. That's the prime directive. Okay, that's ontologically true for both. But now we're in Genesis chapter 2, the sort of details of the story. And God says, I'm going to give you a commandment. What is it? Procreate? No, what's the commandment? That's prime directive. What's the commandment? What? Nope. That's true. What? No. What's the commandment he gives? He says, of all the trees of the garden you can eat, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you may not eat, for the day that you eat of it you will surely die. Right? That's the only commandment. All the rest of it is sort of the implied prime directive of what we're going to do. But when we get to the details about how the story is made, God gives one commandment to the man. Right? It's very important that you understand what the commandment is because it plays a critical role in Genesis chapter 3, doesn't it? Right? Okay. So let's back up a little bit and find out how this whole thing comes about. I'm sorry that we're backtracking, but I think it's important. First, tell me how God makes man. What? What'd you say? Wait. You said dust of the ground and then you added something. I'm going to correct you because it's really important, okay? The word dust of the ground. Dust of the ground is right, okay? The word clay is not right. And the reason it's not right is because of its connection to Egyptian mythology. And I'll show you why, okay? How many women in here have a dust collection? You do? You have dust in little jars with the date on it?
No, it's everywhere.
Oh, no. That's not what I meant. I got it. That's not what I meant.
Okay, I'm sorry.
How many of you, look, it's like wine collection, right? You have a room that you go into and there's bottles of dust with the dates on them and the vintage. And, but sand is not the same as dust, okay? Here's my point. In Hebrew, the word that's used for the collection of material to make man is absolutely worthless. That's the whole point. Dust has no value. Clay has enormous value. So in Egypt, men are made from clay because they have inherent value. In Hebrew, men are made from dust because they have no value until what? Until God breathes into them. It's God's breath in them that gives them value, right? Without God's breath in them, they are worthless, right? I was doing a lot of consulting work in Asia, and we have an anacron. We have an animal expression for worthless called bullshit, right? But in China, bullshit is very valuable. So you can't use bullshit as an expression of worthlessness, right? So you have to convert bullshit into a Chinese expression for worthless. And guess what that is? Dog fart. So, from a Hebrew perspective, men are made from dog fart. God breathes into them and they become valuable. Okay? Now, why is this so important? Because women are not made from dust. What are women made from? They're made from man. And the rabbis say the woman is the first truly human person because the woman is made from human material. Already we see the heightened evaluation of women, how important they are, right? On top of that, all kinds of other things are happening in the creation story that talk about the value of women. Why is that so important? Because there is no other ancient mythology that includes women at all. Hebrew is the only one. In every other ancient mythology, the only thing that's created, other than animals and the earth, are men. Women don't count. Period. Zero property. Okay? But in Hebrew, women are the first truly human people. Amazing, huh? Okay. Now, we'll try to go on a little further.
What's the one, the really famous one? I can't think of the name of it. The creation mythology.
Oh, the Babylonian Elish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like bizarre.
Oh, no, it's not too bizarre.
Hypes up the...
That's right. Tiamat and Marduk have a battle. And Tiamat is the female, and Marduk is the male. And in order to create the world, Marduk has to slice Tiamat in half, and half of the female becomes heaven, and half of the female becomes the earth, right? So it's creation by violence, right? Notice that that doesn't happen in the Hebrew account either. How much violence is there in Genesis chapter 1, verse 2? And the Spirit of God hovered over the face of the deep. There's no violence there. God brings order out of chaos by his word, right? Not by struggle and conflict, which is very much part of the ancient mythology. Do you know how you can all stand this, we're all adults, okay? Do you know how the Egyptians viewed, what action did the Egyptian gods take to make men? Sex, masturbation, right? The god spills his seed into the earth and men appear. Right? So all of the ancient mythologies are based on common human understanding. Sex, violence, all that kind of stuff, except Hebrew. Hebrew's the only one that has this very gentle approach to how the world was created. Isn't that amazing? Right? It's totally unique in the ancient world. Okay. So we got it. We got that there's we already had all this. Yeah, we got to go to this one. So we got the idea that men are made from dust. They're breathed life is breathed into them by God. That's what gives them value. Women are the first truly human beings because they're made from human material, and the relationship between the two of them is built on not how you feel, but on a covenant commitment, a super glue, right? The idea of devak is, when you were a kid, did you ever do this? You ever put super glue on your fingers to see if it really works? Of course we all did that, right? Okay, so, and your mother would say to you, don't do that, your fingers will stick together, and you thought, nah, what does she know? And then you're screaming, yelling because you can't get your fingers apart, and she has to take a ice cube and, a knife and all this kind, right? Okay? Yeah, been there, done that. Okay? Here's what I want you to have him remember from now on. He's super glued to you. If he ever tries to get loose, it's going to tear his skin off. That's devak. Devak is the idea is it doesn't matter how you feel. Today she's great, tomorrow she's horrible. It doesn't make any difference how you feel about it. What matters is you don't want your skin torn off. Okay? Because the idea of devak is stuck together and inseparable without damage. Okay? Really important. And by the way, the only mythology with that kind of idea for the relationship between men and women in Hebrew. Okay? So, when God says then, I need to make an Ezer Kenegdo, he's using a vocabulary that only makes sense in the Hebrew environment. So now we've got to spell this out. An Ezer Kenegdo. What is an Ezer Kenegdo? Well, God chooses these words. It doesn't come from Adam. We already know the word that Adam uses, right? Isha. He says she should be called woman, Isha. But this is a word that God uses for the woman. He says, I will make for him, and it's translated a helper suitable, or a helpmate, or whatever. It's all dog fart. It all doesn't work, right? Because the fact of the matter is that nobody knows how to translate these words. And the reason they don't know how to translate them is because Kenegdo only shows up in this story. Now I'm going to help you figure out from the rabbinic process of 1,000 years of dealing with this, what we think is the best explanation for what this means. And the first thing that we want to notice is that the word ezer comes from a verb, azar, which means helper, supporter, strength. It's a military word. It's actually the word for the stronger of two parties when one person is in trouble and another comes to rescue. Okay? So that means, and by the way, here's the best part. It's the word God uses for himself in relation to Israel. God is Israel's Ezer. Right? What does God do for Israel? He protects, he provides, he sustains, he forgives. He does all the things for Israel that Israel needs to grow. Right? That's right. He's the keeper of Israel. That's a very good word. Okay? And God uses that verb and that noun to describe the woman, which, by the way, is his description for the woman. Okay? So the first thing I have to recognize is God chose his own character to describe her. Okay? It's not true of Adam, is it? Adam's just dust, breathe in, Ruach HaKodesh, breathe in, and you got Adam. But when it comes to the woman, first, the verb is about building a woman, not breathing into and getting a woman, right? And the idea is a deliberate blueprint plan with purpose in mind. So God sat down one day and he said, what does this guy need? And he thought through every detail. And he came up with the blueprint. And then he went to the shop and he started to build. Okay? And what he built was a person modeled on his own relationship ultimately to Israel. Okay? Okay, we got that part. That really makes a lot of sense because women are natural protectors, providers, nourishers, sustainers. It's just built into them, right? And my argument from Guardian Angel is every woman knows that this is a function that she wants to perform because it's built into your DNA, right? Okay, now we get to Kenegdo. Oh, by the way, one of the other things that God does is no man is going to like this. One of the other things that God does with Israel is to punish and chastise. How do you like that? You are God's representation to this relationship, and two functions that you have is to punish and chastise. Sound good? That's right. So- and it's the same idea, isn't it? The idea is she is not only the nourisher, the protector, the provider, which she does quite naturally, she's also the one who confronts you, chastises, and the one who punishes you, right? And guess what? We as men resist that, but it's built into her. It's what God intended. And now I'll show you why. I can use the two of you if you don't trip over these wires. Okay? This is going to be a live demonstration of Kenegdo. Okay? Kenegdo is two prepositions put together. As I said, this is the only place in the Bible where it happens. Ken means to draw close. The other part of the preposition means to go away. So now, here you are. Here's the man. And you are the Ezer Kenegdo. And here's what I want you to do. I want you to go toward him and away from him at the same time. That's why they have so much trouble with this word. It means, no, that's going toward him. You're supposed to go away. No. The whole point is,
This is literally, physically,
yeah, that's
emotionally? What is it?
actually exactly that. You're supposed to go toward him and away from him at the same time.
Okay, like a way, like analyzing what's going on with him?
Now you're being very Greek. Okay? Here's what I want you to do. And of course, the point is, the point is you can't understand because the words are polar opposites, right? So how can I have a word that means two opposite things at the same time? And Maimonides, 11th century Jewish rabbi, came up with the answer. Took a long time, didn't it? 11th century, right? They're struggling with how do we define this word? What is it all about? And here's what he said. It's really easy. I'm going to stand over here. You got to face her, you know. Okay? He says this. When the man is doing what God wants, the woman goes toward him. When he is not doing what God wants, the woman goes away from him. So she is the red light, green light in his life. Okay? She indicates whether or not God is working his purposes through the husband by being the green light going toward him or the red light going away from him. Now here's the beauty of the whole thing. Men are dumb. All we need to know is if it's a red light or a green light. Okay? She, on the other hand, has a huge responsibility. And what is that? To only tell him what it is that God wants, not what you want. Because this is the real tricky part of the whole thing. God has equipped you to be the red light, green light in his life. So if he believes that you're the red light, green light, and he's going to act on that, and you say to him, you know, God's really impressing on me that we need a new car. What's he going to say? Okay, that's right.
Or no, and then I'll ask again in a different way.
Yeah. No, he can't
We
say.
get new couches.
Right.
No.
Oh, sorry. Okay, but here's the difference. Here's the difference, see? Here's the difference. You are to tell him only what it is that God wants him to hear. So your agenda has to be set aside, which means that you need to know the difference between God's agenda for him and your agenda for him. That's a huge, huge issue and takes a lot more spiritual awareness than simply me seeing if it's a green light or a red light. Okay? I had the easy job, man. I just look over and see if it's a green light or a red light. Now, the problem is most of the time I think it's yellow, and so I try anyway, right? Okay? But your job is incredibly complicated because you don't dare tell him green light if you don't know for sure this is what God wants. Right? Okay? You got it? Mm-hmm. Do you know what Kenegdo means now?
Yes.
Okay, good. Great. Thank you very much.
The clock's upsetting. It's upsetting me, too.
Oh.
She'll panic.
Okay, panic, right. Yes, beat the clock, right? Okay, so do you see what's happened? God has said, I need this man to be glued to the woman, and I'm going to give her a special understanding, a spiritual awareness. You know what we call it? Women's intuition. But it's not women's intuition. It's a spiritual covenant with God to understand what it is that God is doing in the relationship so that she can direct the man according to God's purposes. Now, I will tell you how this actually works in practical circumstances. It works like this. after I've made the mistake, she says, "I told you so." That's how it works. Oh, you're laughing.
Just ran a red light.
Yeah, I told you so. I mean, the whole point is men don't want to think that their wives are the spiritual directors of their homes. Men want to think that they're the ones who are responsible for all this. Genesis chapter 3, we're getting there, okay? Men want to think that somehow they should be in charge. And as a result, they don't pay attention to the deep covenant relationship that God has with the woman to direct me in a way that I'll be blessed. And so I act independently of her, and things go awry. And then she says, "I told you so." I'll give you a practical example in my own life, right? Yeah, there's so many. Thank you very much. Okay? When there was a time in my life when I was being very much an entrepreneur and I made a lot of money, and I thought I would retire for the rest of my life at age 48, and we moved to Grand Cayman. Lived on 7 Mile Beach, wonderful, right? And my wife kept saying, "You know, I think you haven't diversified this enough so that we will be at risk." And I kept telling her, "Yeah, but the returns are so good." Right? And she just kept reminding me that maybe God had something else in mind. And I kept saying, "Yeah, but the returns, look, you can't beat these returns." Right? And lo and behold, the cousin of Bernie Madoff became one of our acquaintances. I mean, metaphorically. In other words, what happened to us is exactly what happened with the Bernie Madoff crowd. The people who were responsible for the money that we had embezzled it all. And afterwards, after we went from several million to zero, guess what my wife said? "I told you so." Right? It hurt because it hurt her. Her whole life was turned upside down because her husband didn't listen to the red light. Right? Took a long, long time for us to get through that. She was very angry for a long time. And of course, I felt incredibly humiliated. Right? It was very difficult. Years of trying to rebuild a relationship. I could have avoided all that if I just remembered, by the way, I hadn't written the book yet. Okay? If I just remembered the design plan. And the design plan is, she was trying to communicate to me in the best way that she knew how, what God was hinting to her. Right? And I didn't listen because I was in control. The biggest problem for the men in this relationship is control. And the biggest problem for women is the ability to project their own agenda into the mix. Right? And God's quite aware of all of that. And as a result, we have to be particularly careful. And as a result, we will now look at Genesis chapter 3 to find out how it all came apart. Because look at the design. It was beautiful. The design was you're equal in purpose before God. You're both in His image. You're both required to do exactly the things to be verbs of God in the world. He's equipped you in a way that will absolutely bless Him. He's given him responsibility to be glued to you. What woman wouldn't respond to a man who was super glued to her? Without feelings, just committed to her, no matter what, right? You got the DNA package to do that. Everything in the design plan is so cool. So what happened? Why did it fall apart? What happened in Genesis chapter 3 that literally destroyed this absolutely beautiful plan that God had in place? What?
Blue came undone.
Yeah, but not accidentally. What? Well, we're getting hints, and I'll tell you what we're going to do. In exactly 59 seconds, we're going to go have dinner, and when we come back, we'll talk about what happened with the serpent. And the story's very different than what you think. Okay? Good? Questions?
Oh, I have so many questions.
So far.
No, I mean, so far. So God has created the animals in front of man.
Mm-hmm.
And he's created woman and said that you are man's helper.
Okay, wait. I don't like that word helper at all.
Okay,
Let's back up and say you're the Ezer Kenegdo.
Okay, so you're the Ezer Kenegdo.
Right.
What did he need the Ezer Kenegdo for at that point? And is it perhaps because there was only animal? And so God has made man to be relational in his own image, because we didn't talk about that being God's image. But that is God's image, right?
What, to be relational?
To be relational.
Sure, he has to be related to himself through another person. It can't happen just by looking in the mirror.
Have the other person
Right?
who is going to
Right?
So so is it that she is there a Kenegdo to keep him from that instinct of needing to relate and instead of having another being to relate to, that he would have been related to the animals?
Okay, I understand what you're saying, but but look, when Adam goes through the whole naming process, what does the text say? And there was no animal found to be sufficient for what was needed for Adam, right? So even though he has this perfect relationship with the animals, which by the way is a relationship of hierarchy, authority, and service, right? That relationship isn't sufficient for him to know who he is. So God has to create an equal being for voluntary submission so that he can understand his own identity. That's what's happening in the story, right? Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah. Good, because that's the basis that Genesis 3 goes forward on. If we're in conflict over the equality of this relationship and how the two fit together to give identity to both, then we're going to miss out on what happens in Genesis 3. So we need to be there. Yes.
Just quickly, I understand this when the two beings are evenly yoked, okay, they're Christians. Now, how does that apply to one who is not a Christian and the other one who is a Christian?
Okay, I'm going to ask you to hold that question because, here's why. Because being a Christian has nothing to do with this story, right? That little yoke passage comes about 3,500 years later in Paul. And so Paul is saying something in reflection to what happens in this story. But the first thing we need to understand is what's the story, right? Okay? Yes.
So is this term, Ezer Kenegdo, is that the same, is that also used when he sees all the animals and he found no?
Ezer Kenegdo? No. God makes up this term. The idea for not finding an animal is that there's no animal sufficient for the relationship. And God says, I will, and here comes the first time it's used, I will make for him this relational being that goes toward and away at the same time. The Ezer Kenegdo.
So then what is the term used in Genesis 2:20 when it says, he named all the animals, but for Adam there was not found, King James, but there was not found an help meet for him. I know Ezer is in there, but what is the?
Yeah, I have to go look at the text in Hebrew.
It's right here.
Oh.
If that helps.
Okay. That's a really text. Oh, you put me on the spot here.
Yeah, you can look it up later, but I'm just, 'cause in English,
Yeah.
it's the same term. He didn't find one of these. And
He
so
didn't.
God said,
Yeah.
"Thank you."
Well, King James translated with the same term that they use for Ezer Kenegdo.
Yeah.
Um,
That's why it looks like it's the same term used
Yeah.
twice.
Okay. Hold on to that, and I'll give you the text in a second. Okay. Let's make sure that everybody else is on the same page because now we're over time for dinner. Okay. Any other questions about where we are right now in the text? We're good? Okay? The most important thing is for men to understand the role that God had in mind for the woman, and for women to understand the incredible spiritual dynamic and responsibility that God put in a woman's hands. Right? There's no second-class citizen stuff here, boys. It's really, really important to see that God built this covenant relationship with the woman in such a way that she acts in a role that functions as relationship manager and with total blessing in mind for the man, right? There's one other piece of this that we could fill in if I got 30 seconds, okay? There's a Hebrew works by giving you ideas that show up in other places so that you can connect the ideas and see the richness of the concept, okay? And you remember that Adam is put into a deep sleep. Actually, the word is a word for trance, okay? So that Adam is totally out of it when God creates the woman. Give me another passage in the Genesis account where a man is put into a total trance so that God can do something. Abraham, right? Abraham prepares the slaughtered animals for the covenant relationship, but God puts him into a total trance so that God alone walks down between the animals to create the covenant relationship, a promise to himself, not to Abraham. Okay? Abraham is the beneficiary of an action that God performs while Abraham is totally in the trance. Okay? So you can think of Adam in the same way. Adam is the beneficiary of what God does when Adam has no part in it at all. He is absolutely in a trance, and God creates the woman independently of Adam. Adam doesn't have any design input, right? And as a result of that, when Adam is awake and the woman is presented to him, he recognizes that it is to his benefit that God did this. Adam is the beneficiary of the covenant relationship that God creates with the woman. Okay? All right, let's go have some dinner.
So God really loved his creation from the very beginning.
I'm sorry, what?
God really loved his creation from the very beginning.
Yes?
That's why he created it out of dust.
Oh,
First love was for man.
yeah, you sound like you've read Corinthians. Okay, let's start again, okay? The whole point is that Genesis 1 story is a story of ontological equality. He created them male and female, right? So he creates basically it says, let's make man in our own image, and by man he means mankind, and he creates them, and the text specifically says male and female so that you won't be confused and think that he only created men and women came later, okay? That's kind of like the executive summary of the creation story. And now chapter 2 tells you the details about how it happened. And the details about how it happened is, of course, he created the man first from the dust. And then out of the parts of the man, he made the woman, right? So we get all these relationships together, but it doesn't change anything about the hierarchical authority of the man simply because he's temporally first. Do you understand? Okay. Anybody else? No? Let's have dinner.